In terms of global stability, there are few relationships more vital than that between the United States and Pakistan. While the nations share many strategic interests, there are also serious challenges to overcome. This week on Dialogue, part 3 of our series, Pakistan and America, Can the Twain Meet? Hello again and welcome to the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington, D.C. I'm John Molesky. Each week, Dialogue explores the world of ideas and issues in international affairs, history, and culture. Our guests today are Riaz Khan, former Foreign Secretary of Pakistan and a Pakistan scholar here at the Wilson Center. William Milam, former U.S. Ambassador to Pakistan and a senior policy scholar at the Woodrow Wilson Center. And also Robert Hathaway, diplomatic historian and director of the Asia program here at the Center. Gentlemen, welcome back to part 3 of the series that all of you have participated in. This is my first go-round. I thought in terms of sort of wrapping things up, look, we could spend 30 hours on this versus just 3 half hours. But I wanted to revisit sort of a fundamental premise, and that is to get each of you to weigh in from the perspectives of both countries on what type of priority is relations with each other when setting priorities for foreign policy. Bob, we'll start with you from the U.S. perspective. Where does Pakistan rank on the list of foreign policy priorities?
Well, many of us believe that Pakistan may be the single greatest challenge that the Obama administration faces on the national security agenda. Terrorism and the war against terror has driven the U.S.-Pakistan relationship in recent years. But many of us would argue that if we're going to put this partnership on a long-term basis, then we have to broaden it so that it's about much more than simply terrorism.
Well, and is this a phenomena completely in reaction to 9/11?
Well, we had a largely ruptured relationship with Pakistan throughout the 1990s. We resurrected that relationship post 9/11. So the short answer to your question is yes. Mm-hmm. Longer term, we've alternated between very close partnerships with Pakistan and then periods where it was a much more distant relationship. But there certainly is a history to the relationship that predates 9/11.
And Bill, speaking of that, even predating that, there was a time where it was all in reaction to the U.S.-Soviet standoff, and so there was a different role to be played from the U.S. point of view.
For quite a long time, the U.S.-Soviet standoff was, I think, a large part of what drove us, at least, in the relationship with Pakistan. And as Bob said, the relationship from the 50s, if you want to look at it, is very episodic. High points, quite low points. But then after the 1989 or 90, when the Soviets collapsed, there was sort of a period where I think both countries were sort of wondering where the relationship was going. We had a number of problems in terms of the development of nuclear weapons and also the military takeover later on, which drove the relationship way down and by law required us to put sanctions of different types on Pakistan. And I think Pakistan would have obviously drew back a little from us at that point. So.
Bob says it's either at the top of the list or certainly on the short list. Is it a priority right now?
Now I think it's the top of the list. I think, you know, it was there without being recognized even early on, maybe even before 9/11, but it certainly is there and recognized now.
Pakistan knew it was on the list before we did? Is that it?
Maybe so. Maybe so.
Riaz, from the other side of the coin, let's have you speak from the perspective of Pakistan. Where is the United States as a foreign policy priority for Pakistan?
Well, of course, United States is the sole superpower in the world, and we attach a great deal of importance to our relationship with the United States. And we feel that United States should also attach importance, not because of these various episodes, so to say, the Soviet Union, Afghanistan, or 9/11, but if you look at the map, Pakistan is a pivotal country in the region. It is 170 million people. to start with. Then it is at the crossroads of South Asia, Central Asia, and the Gulf. If that region, this confluence of regions, is important for United States, then certainly for United States relations with Pakistan should be important.
Do you think that Pakistan views the United States as a good ally or as a necessary ally, if you could make that distinction?
Well, I don't believe in alliances. I basically believe in convergence of interests. And I think there is sufficient convergence of interests between Pakistan and United States for the sake of stability of the area. And from our perspective, for our own development and progress, there is an interest that this should be a stable and a strong relationship.
Gentlemen, if each of you could weigh in on sort of how we would frame where the world is today. We've invoked the Cold War, and that was the paradigm within which a lot of international relations was defined. Then the war on terror became the mantra of the Bush administration. The Obama administration has begun migrating away from that. Could you come up with a term that would be useful? Some have said the war on terror was very limited and even problematic. How would we describe where we are today? I remember one of the first programs I was involved in over here at the Wilson Center was defining the post-Cold War era. And that was pre-9/11. At least for a while, that seemed to define it. What do you think would be a good operative phrase or way of thinking about this that is more accurate than where we are right now?
Well, there is an element of uncertainty in the world. We had thought after the collapse of the Soviet Union that now everything is going to move in one direction. There would be its upsurge of democracy
the end
and
of history,
freedom, end of history, as some people said. But then it didn't prove to be that way. Why could it have moved in a different direction? That's an academic question. But today, certainly because of what are described as the non-state issues in the world, terrorism is one of them. There are other issues like climate change is another issue. There are many other issues. So because of this, there is an element of uncertainty where the world is moving. And on top of all this, we are faced with the disputes and conflicts which are now old and which are still the source of conflict and tension in the world. In addition to that, there are new conflicts and tensions in cultural terms which have emerged, and that is making the world uncertain. And that also makes diplomacy far more important in this world.
It's almost as if we move to a more natural, messy state from the almost artificially imposed neatness of the Cold War. Yeah. At the risk of calling that neat, if you know what I mean.
Well, I mean, the Cold War gave us an intellectual framework. It sometimes distorted our vision. For instance, we looked at relations with the underdeveloped world through that prism of the Cold War, which was not necessarily a helpful prism. One of the things that I would suggest that is fundamentally different today, or we're beginning this transition, for all of our national history, American national history, we have been European-focused, Europe-centric. We are now in the process of becoming much more focused on Asia. And I don't care how you define Asia. Some people would carry it all the way to what a lot of people call the Middle East or the Gulf region, certainly South Asia as well as East Asia. And I think this represents a fundamental change in America's thinking about the world, thinking about its own interests. I don't have yet a new nice name to replace Cold War, but I think the shift in the power balance and in American interests from Europe, the direction of Asia, is certainly going to be part of that new equation.
Bill, what Bob describes is, in military terms, we often talk about the military being guilty of fighting the last war. In diplomatic terms, how far along are we to embracing this new focus from the old war?
Well, that's a good question. I think it depends on which part of the world and maybe which country you're talking about. But in fact, I think diplomacy, at least in the United States, is still catching up with these changes. I would agree with both of what Bob and Riaz said, and say that I think what has happened and what I don't know how to characterize it. I don't have a word necessarily, but a lot of forces that were sort of somehow contained before the Cold War ended have sprung loose and are, you know, becoming great challenges to us. Terrorism is only one. Climate change is another. There are a number of them, and I think that our diplomacy, as well as our military strategy, is not sure how to deal with these yet. We're groping. I think it's almost an era of, shall we say, learn as you go, learn on the job, and that sometimes could be expensive.
And deadly.
And deadly too. Well, deadly, expensive in lives as well as fortune. You know.
September 23rd, article in the New York Times about potential shifts in the Obama administration policy in Afghanistan to put more emphasis on Pakistan. A couple of things from it suggesting that this has been something that Vice President Biden has been pushing for. Instead of increasing troops, Biden proposed scaling back the overall American military presence in Afghanistan. Rather than trying to protect the Afghan population from the Taliban, American forces would concentrate on strikes against Qaeda cells primarily in Pakistan, using special forces, Predator missile attacks, and other surgical tactics. And then here's a statistic they provide. This emphasis would shift to Pakistan because Biden thinks this is the more important priority, as you have agreed. And he says that, the reporter says that for every $30 we spend in Afghanistan, we're only spending $1 in Pakistan. Now, based on the priorities that you all agreed on, it seems like we're way off in that equation.
Well, would that still be true when the Kerry-Lugar bill is ready to be implemented and is flowing? I'm not sure that 30-to-1 ratio will still exist. Obviously, our military is always expensive, and so I don't know what it costs to have 60,000, 80,000 troops in Afghanistan. I don't know what it'll cost when we increase the number, if we increase the number. But I think the ratio will even out somehow.
In a previous discussion on this three-part series, you each talked about the difference between military spending versus humanitarian aid, and you talked about the SWAT offensive and all of the displacement of people that has caused. Are we even coming close to doing enough to address that situation?
Well, first of all, let me say that lumping together Pakistan and Afghanistan would not be the right way of looking at things. Pakistan has to be dealt, the relationships with Pakistan have to be on their own, and the problems that you have in Afghanistan, they have to be addressed by themselves. There are certain overlappings where there would be a requirement of coordination, cooperation, consultations with Pakistan. But looking at it that as if these two are together and there is some kind of a zero-sum game, that whether you have a choice of spending in Afghanistan more or more in Pakistan, that is not the right way of looking at it.
I agree. I think it's less that and more about limited resources.
ASPAC is an unfortunate terminology in my view. So you have to deal with Pakistan on its own. As regards the other issues, the SWAT question, I think SWAT problem of displaced persons has already been resolved, and I remember that when this question was raised, I did not see that this was going to be a long-term issue, because had it become a long-term issue, it would have eroded the credibility of the army, the Pakistan government, and they could not have afforded that. So the SWAT refugees or displaced persons could not be treated like the Afghan refugees in Pakistan. They have gone back. Now, of course, we have to have this process of reconstruction within SWAT, helping these people, which I think will be done.
And does what has happened here permanently? You know, nothing is permanent, but at least for the foreseeable future, has this weakened the hand of the Taliban? Do they not get to come to the table and negotiate? Have they been discredited through this offensive?
Which Taliban are we talking about? The Pakistani Taliban? It's certainly weakened their hand, I think, although it's not clear to me that they will stay weakened. But has it weakened the other Taliban, which are the Afghan Taliban? Probably not.
Well, more recent reports in Afghanistan is that the Taliban is doing better. And it's more sophisticated than we anticipated.
Yeah.
There is a difference between the Pakistani Taliban and the Afghan Taliban. Pakistani Talibans are basically disparate groups of extremists who have got mixed up also with criminal elements. Afghan Taliban are a segment apart within the Afghan population. We should not forget that after all, Afghan Taliban, they had ruled Afghanistan, or they had controlled Afghanistan for almost 6 years. So there is a resonance between the Afghan Taliban and certain segments of Afghan population, especially in the Pashtun areas.
What about the economy in Pakistan? You've all agreed that there can't be any real progress here unless the economy improves. The U.S. economy is going through the doldrums as well, the world economy. What's the current situation economically?
Well, I think it's a troubled economy. Pakistan has been hit by the global downturn. Pakistan had some very serious economic problems well before the crash of Wall Street and the downturn in the economy. What bothers me is that I'm not seeing from the Pakistani government, though I should say I'm not singling out just this government because I had the same concerns with previous governments. I'm not seeing the long-term strategic vision and planning that I would like to see. Whether you talk about energy shortages or food insecurity or providing health care, whole host of issues are addressed in an episodic, ad hoc fashion. Rather than devising and then implementing a clearly thought out strategic plan. A plan, I should add, where there should be a substantial international element. It's clearly in our interests for humanitarian and realpolitik reasons to see that Pakistan succeeds. And I join my colleagues, I think, in wanting to see a very generous American assistance program for Pakistan.
Along those lines, Bill, the expectation was that under President Obama versus a President Bush, we would see some evolution of these relations, and that Obama brought a certain level of popularity to the table, even though in some polls, as you mentioned in a previous episode, America is not very popular among Pakistanis. Are we seeing any difference, any evolution under Obama from Bush?
You mean in terms of the Pakistani public opinion?
The policy from America in general, but then also the reaction of Pakistanis.
I think you see an evolution in policy under President Obama. Whether you see a change in public attitudes in Pakistan yet is much less clear to me. I don't see any myself. There's still a large segment of the media which is preaching a kind of anti-Americanism, actually conspiracy theories. We are being linked with India and or Israel, and some of the people even say, some of the, I think, more extreme television personalities even say that our object is to undercut the Pakistani state, to weaken it, to even perhaps give India a chance to become more dominant and so forth. So I'm not, and then the whole question of that they keep saying is that the war on terror, and I don't like that term myself, but the so-called war on terror is really not Pakistan's war, it's America's war, and the Pakistanis are fighting it for us. This is what we hear, what they hear, and it's widespread, particularly in what I'd call the vernacular media, the Urdu press, the Urdu TV. And as far as I'm able to tell from talking to some people who've been in Pakistan, I haven't talked to Riaz about this yet, but there's almost no, shall we say, moderate or liberal voices which are opposing that. A few English language newspapers, but they can't be read by most of the population. So I think it strikes me, and I don't want to go on forever on this, but it strikes me that somehow over a period of time, the president, our president, has to convince Pakistani government, military, and its people that we really are a stable ally of Pakistan. We really mean to stay in Afghanistan until the job is done. We need their help doing it. but that we really, our interests are in a long-term and stable Pakistan. And I don't think people believe that yet.
Let me say one thing, that economy is critical as far as Pakistan is concerned. But in terms of assistance, we appreciate assistance that is given by United States and which is being discussed. Here there is only one thing which is important, that the conditionalities, you have every right to monitor whatever assistance is given, how it is spent. But in terms of conditions, you have to be careful that it does not rub Pakistani sensitivities on the wrong side. It should not be seen as if there is a dictation by United States for Pakistan to do something in return for this assistance.
And is there a feeling that's been the case to this point?
Yeah, because this what Bill has mentioned about this whole question of war on terror, that this is not Pakistan's war, this is United States war. It is partly due to the fact that there have been these demands, do more. So when you say do more, then it becomes as if this is not our war, it is somebody else's war that we are fighting. But apart from that, I think what is very important is trade facilitation. If there are strategic interests which are involved on the part of European Union and United States in Pakistan, then the best thing that they can do for Pakistan and Pakistan's economy is trade facilitation. And that would also show that they want a long-term relationship with Pakistan. So this is one thing, and I will say a couple of things, that things are slightly looking up. One, the level of violence in the last couple of months has reduced. There are no bomb blasts, for example, in the cities, which used to be a phenomena almost every week. Second thing is that the two major parties, they have, I think, now come to an agreement that they are not going to, the opposition is not going to destabilize this government, which is very important. Because if there is political stability, then economy will start picking up. And lastly, which is most important, is that on the question of extremism and terrorism, the public opinion has certainly undergone a change, that Pakistan doesn't want Talibanization and extremists must be defeated.
Can I say something,
Sure,
John,
please.
about the economy? First of all, I agree with Riaz about the trade, and that would include trade with India, which would be beneficial, very beneficial to both countries, and which has been cut off for many, many years. The thing that worries me about the economy is that I agree that we shouldn't condition our assistance, economic assistance. We should make them accountable for it, and we should monitor it, but we shouldn't be conditioning it. I heard some ridiculous conditions suggested when Kerry Lugar was under discussion. I think they all got thrown out. But what worries me is that, and I even heard the president, Zardari, say this, that he's counting on our assistance to kick the economy, to kick it in the pants and get it moving upwards. You can't rely on that. They've got to have, as Bob said, a better plan, a more strategic plan. They've got to figure out how to get their own people to invest and then probably get some foreign investment. They need to, the economy is all so far kind of wishful thinking, I think, and that worries the heck out of me.
Gentlemen, we're into our final minutes. Maybe I've managed to save about a minute for each of you. For our viewers who are watching this program, who are interested observers of this relationship and of this situation, looking forward, as experts on the area, tell us what things you're going to be looking at in the next couple months to take the temperature of how things are going, whether we're seeing things improving or not. Bob, if we can begin with you.
Well, in the short run, I think a lot of us will be looking at security issues. Does the level of violence within Pakistan continue to diminish? Does the amount of cross-border activity between Pakistan and Afghanistan diminish or increase? I think in a little bit longer term, we're going to be looking at some of these economic issues and also at political stability. And stability in itself is desirable, but it's certainly not sufficient. Is the political system in Pakistan able to begin to come to grips with some of the real challenges that the country faces? So it's more than simply stability, it's also at least a modest amount of effectiveness, governance.
You know, I saw something in the paper today that interested me, and I think it gets to what I am really concerned about, and that is that somehow the relationship with India has to be put back on the track of normalization. Mumbai was a terrible, terrible thing, terrible tragedy, and since then there has been, as far as I can tell, just in fact regression, not progress. And you know, I hate to talk about the past president Musharraf, you know, because he made a lot of terrible mistakes, but one thing he did was set up a back channel which got within a couple of sentences of an agreement which would have restarted the normalization process. So they've got a piece of paper. I'd like to see those last two sentences get in. One thing that I noticed, this thing in the paper that I wanted to point out, is things like, as of today, the leader of the Lashkar-e-Taiba, which is a very big jihadist organization situated in Punjab, was put under house arrest. Does that mean anything? Will it continue? Will Pakistan begin to start to take measures which show that they really mean to do things that will help normalize the relationship with India?
Forgive me for doing this to you, but we have about 30 seconds for you to add to our list of...
I can only say that I agree with Bob, and I also agree with Bill. And let me say that the relationship with India is very important, but I think the two countries, they need to learn to resolve issues. That would be the best confidence building between them. Apart from that, I'm looking at security, lessening of violence, especially how we deal with the problems in the FATA, which is the tribal areas, in particular in the Waziristan area.
Gentlemen, thank you. I see parts 4, 5, and 6 in our future. I think we've barely begun to scratch the surface.
A mini-series.
That's right. And unfortunately, we're out of time for this, this segment. In addition to thanking our guests, we want you to know that we appreciate your comments and encourage you to share them with us. And you can do so by sending email to dialogue@wilsoncenter.org. Until next week, for all of us at Dialogue and at the Wilson Center, I'm John Molesky. Thanks for watching.
Dialogue is a co-production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars and MHZ Networks. Dialogue can be seen on the MHZ Worldview channel, which is available to public TV stations nationwide. For more information, please visit www.worldview.org.